Hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to the weekly home workshop. I'm Terry Taylor with the Tailored Realty team. Every Wednesday at 12:15, we spend about 15 minutes breaking down real estate topics for buyers, sellers, and homeowners. It's simple, practical, and easy to understand. If you're joining us live, thanks for spending part of your lunch break with us. If you're catching the replay, we're glad you're here too. Let's go ahead and jump into today's topic: understanding closing costs. Closing costs. So, and don't forget, these segments are strictly designed just to give you some basic notes, some overview notes. It's not super deep. We're not diving into super complex topics, but we are doing things that will hopefully give you a better idea, a better understanding of the whole process in general. Um, we are on episode 10, so feel free to go back and check out some of our previous episodes. We hope it's going to be informative to you. We're going to just take 15 minutes, go over these very quickly. We do encourage you to add any kind of comments you want into the comment section. If it's a question, we'll certainly address that question in the comments. If we can address it live, we'll do it live as well. So, first of all, what are closing costs? So, closing costs are those fees and expenses involved in finalizing a real estate contract or transaction. A lot of times, um, you're not expecting certain costs as a buyer or a seller. So, we just want you to be informed that closing costs uh, do exist. And oftentimes, again, they're for both buyers and sellers. So, essentially, closing costs goes beyond the purchase price. So you could have a contracted purchase price, an amount that you've agreed upon, that the appraisal came up with, whatever. But the closing costs are a little bit different from that. And it's also different from the down payment. So if you think about it, you got purchase price, you got down payment, but then you've got closing costs. And that's something we have to kind of inform buyers and sellers. A lot of times you don't think it costs money to sell a property. Not true. And certainly you don't think it costs money beyond the loan. If you're a buyer, again, also not true. So we just want to make sure you're informed. That's what this is designed to do, to give you the information you need to make wise decisions. But just think about closing costs as that final piece of the transaction. And it shouldn't come as a surprise. Again, if you're dealing with a real estate agent, they should be preparing you for that. It'll ultimately come from your lender if you're getting a loan. You'll see it on that final settlement statement. And again, as a seller, you'll also see it on that as well. What are some typical closing costs that's included for the buyer? So there are loan related fees associated with it, like origination fees and underwriting fees. There's an appraisal cost. There's home inspections. Again, this is on the buyer side. There's title insurance. There's attorney fees or closing fees. Again, here in South Carolina, because South Carolina, you have to have an attorney for a real estate closing. And then there's also prepaid items like taxes and insurance. So, as a buyer, these are some of the things that you want to consider that can and will be coming up as a closing cost. A good rule of thumb that you can think of is they're usually around 2 to 5% of the purchase price. Again, they'll vary, there are no absolutes. But just as a rule of thumb, you can expect maybe 2 to 5% of the purchase price. So buyers don't just bring the down payment, they also need to plan for those closing cost items. Also, if you think about it, sometimes, and I guess it just varies from lender to lender and situation to situation, sometimes those appraisal fees will be upfront fees. And oftentimes, like the home inspections, those will be due at the time of inspection. So those are out of pocket upfront costs that'll hit you a lot of times. Certainly, those closing fees, attorney fees, loan origination fees, underwriting fees are a part of the closing costs. That's on the buyer side. What about on the seller side? So, some of the typical seller closing costs include real estate commissions. And of course, there's been a lot of movement in the real estate industry surrounding real estate commissions. Uh, Talk to your agent about it, but certainly commissions are negotiable. And whether or not the seller pays Both sides of that commission is totally up to the seller, but real estate commissions are a big part of seller closing costs, and often they help the deal to go through smoothly. They also have attorney and closing fees. If it applies, there's transfer taxes or even kind of like prorated taxes. Don't forget, during the transaction, sometimes there'll be repairs or even seller concessions that are allowed for, and the seller's willing to do that. And probably the biggest chunk of their seller closing costs are going to be attached to the mortgage payoff if there is any. So if you still have a mortgage on the property, remember that mortgage has to be satisfied before you can transfer that deed. So that represents a lot of the seller closing costs: real estate commissions, attorney closing fees, any kind of taxes, transfer of taxes, anything that's been negotiated in the contract, whether it's repairs or seller concessions, and finally, ultimately, the mortgage payoff. Um, the range is very general, so you can't really use that 2 to 3% or 2 to 4% rule. A lot of times it's going to be higher than the buyer's closing costs, but it also depends on how the deal is structured. So it all comes down, commissions, negotiations, how those things are accounted for. Also, for the seller, a lot of times you can just think of it as their closing costs are coming out of the proceeds from the sale. So whatever the proceeds, whatever that check looks like that you get from selling your property, it'll be minus those fees. So whatever you have left means that the other fees have generally already been paid. Okay. And certainly there are edge cases and there are going to be times where there are exceptions to the rule. But for the most part, when you get that final check in hand, closing costs, commissions, all of those other things have already been taken out. So whatever you have in hand is left. The mortgage has been paid off. It's not like you have to go find these different entities and agencies and start writing a bunch of checks based on what you have in your hand. Usually, what you have in your hand is what's left over after the expenses have been paid. So, some might be asking, can closing costs be negotiated? Absolutely. In fact, closing costs are often a part of the negotiation. Um, if you think about it, sometimes purchasing a home for a buyer can be very cost prohibitive, and sellers may agree to contribute towards some of those expenses in order to sell the home. Um, Buyers can sometimes adjust their offers based on the cost. So, whatever that cost structure looks like, buyers can adjust their offers based on that. And some of that can include closing costs. You can think about credits can be negotiated depending on those market conditions. So, the short answer is yes, closing costs can be negotiated. And if you don't know what that looks like, again, you want to make sure you have a real estate professional that understands what they're doing and that can talk on all sides, right? The realtors generally speak to the attorneys as well as the lenders on behalf of the clients or in cooperation with the clients to make sure a full understanding of what's going on is had by all. So closing costs aren't fixed, and they can also be a part of the strategy. Think about it. If you're a seller, there are things that can be done based on full priced offers. If you get competing offers, some offers might go above the the contract, not the contract, but the listing price. So if you've listed it at X amount and someone comes in above that and they want you to handle some of their closing costs, what you want to do is get yourself as a seller. You'd like to get a seller's net sheet and see what you'll net on each particular offer that's been given. So again, the short answer is you can negotiate closing costs. Nearly every part of that real estate transaction can be negotiated. There are quite a few things that you can utilize in negotiations. And one of the things you may not have known closing costs was a part of it, but certainly you can negotiate based on those closing costs. So, what are some quick takeaways? Number one, both buyers and sellers have closing costs. So, don't forget that. Um, Number two, you want to make sure you're expecting these closing costs. They shouldn't come to you as a surprise, right? So be prepared, be braced. I always say kind of brace yourself and prepare for the worst. And when it's better than what you expected, then you're very satisfied and pleased. So plan ahead. Anytime you plan ahead, that always makes the process that much smoother. And don't forget, some costs can be negotiated. Very short topic on today, but again, just wanted you to have an idea that uh, the real estate transaction goes beyond just the purchase price and down payment. There are closing costs, right? There are um, other things that are wrapped up in this transaction that you have to be ready for. Now, if you're local to the Columbia, South Carolina area, Yolanda and I will be performing a home buyers workshop um, in a couple of weeks. Listen out, look at our Facebook page. We'll have some announcements coming forward soon, but um, WFMV, which is our local radio station, puts on a huge seminar for the community. And we've been a part of that for the last few years now, and we will be a part of it again. Very much like this segment, it's a little bit longer, and there's a lot more. There's going to be a lot of entities there. So see if you can find out about that. The Advancing the Dream is what it's called, the Home Buyers Workshop. And there's a lot of good information that'll be given out there. Tailored Realty team will be there to present as well. Very much like these short clips, we're going to be giving you a wealth of information that you can use, whether you're a buyer or a seller, helping you understand the market, helping you understand what to expect from A to Z. But it is, I think it's April 18th, but check your calendars or go online. We'll have some information online. Go to our YouTube page. You can find past episodes of the weekly webinar. Yolanda does some community-based interviews as well. So we got a lot of information that you can utilize and use. We've also got some playlists that help you understand the home buying process a whole lot better. So check out our YouTube page, go to our social media sites, and be sure to like, subscribe, and get this information that you can use. This is just a part of the service that we provide, making sure that you get the information that you need to make wise decisions. Because again, most of the time people don't realize what you don't know oftentimes can cost you a whole lot of money. So that's why we're here. If this was helpful, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who can use it. Remember, whether you're buying, selling, or just planning ahead, once you're a client, you're always a friend. We'll see you next Wednesday at 12:15 for the weekly home workshop. Thanks so much for joining us on your lunch break. And we look forward to seeing you again real soon. Don't forget, if you have questions or comments, feel free to throw those in the chat. We'll take a look at them and we'll get answers to any questions that you may have. Thanks so much. Take care. Have a good one.